When I close my eyes, I still hear the sound of her laughter echoing through that house. Not the cruel one from court, but the soft, innocent laugh of a child who thought her mother could fix anything. Back then, everything I did was for her. Every breath, every hour, every tear I hid behind a smile. After my husband died, I was 29, with a 4-year-old and nothing but unpaid bills and an old sewing machine. The house we lived in wasn't even ours. Just a cramped portion my in-laws let us use out of pity. But I promised myself that one day, my daughter would never have to beg for space or for love. So I worked. God knows I worked. Days at a tailoring shop. Nights stitching bridal dresses for women who would never know the woman behind their wedding gowns. My fingers bled, my back ached, but every rupee I earned went into one dream, a home of our own. I remember the day I found the land. A tiny plot on the edge of the city, half broken, half wild, but it had sunlight. It had promise. The dealer laughed when I said I'd buy it. He looked at me, this thin widow with calloused hands, and said, "You'll need a miracle, Baji." And maybe I did. But I signed that first paper anyway. My first signature of hope. I didn't know then how dangerous a signature could become. The first brick we laid, I wrote my daughter's initials on it. For luck, I told her. She was 8 then, missing a front tooth, holding the brush like it was magic. "Will we live here forever, Amy?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Forever. I believed it. Those were the good years, or what passed for them. The house rose slowly. 1 room, then 2, then a little balcony where we used to dry clothes and watch the neighborhood kids play. I opened a small tailoring business in the front room. Razia's Designs. It wasn't much, but the women in the area started coming to me. Some for blouses, some for gossip, some just to sit and sip chai. My daughter would sit by the window doing her homework, calling out, "Amy, this thread doesn't match." Or, "Amy, when will you finish?" "I'm hungry." I'd laugh and tell her, "The house runs on patience, Mary John. Eat some roti, I'll be done soon." That little voice filled every corner of the home. Evenings were our time. I'd cook dal while she told me about school. She was smart, sharper than I ever was. Sometimes when I'd count the day's earnings, she'd say, "Amy, when I grow up, I'll make you rich." And I'd answer, "You already have." She'd giggle, roll her eyes, and hug me from behind. It's strange how hugs can become memories that hurt to remember. The years blurred. The business grew. I hired 2 helpers. We saved enough to buy new furniture, then a small car. When she turned 18, I transferred everything, the house, the shop, the land, into her name. People told me I was foolish. "Itna barosa kis par kar rahi ho, Razia," they said. "Denaya ka koi yakin nahi." But she was my world. And I trusted her more than I trusted my own breath. "She's my daughter," I'd reply. What could she possibly take from me that isn't already hers? On her 21st birthday, I gave her the house deed in an envelope wrapped with a red ribbon. She looked confused. "Amy, why now?" "Because everything good in my life started with you," I said. She hugged me tight, whispered, "I'll make you proud." That night we ate cake on the floor, laughing, teasing each other about who got the bigger slice. I thought nothing in the world could ever break us. I didn't see the faint shadow in her eyes, the one that looked past me, toward something I couldn't name. Sometimes I wonder if trust makes you blind, or if love makes you forget to look. That house, the one I built with sweat, hope, and prayers, was more than walls and bricks. It was proof that we survived. And when I handed her that paper, with my name replaced by hers, I thought I was giving her a future. But I wasn't. I was giving her the weapon that would one day destroy me. I didn't know then that my signature would become my downfall. He walked into my house with a smile that could melt glass. Polite, confident, and far too sure of himself. I still remember the way my daughter looked at him that day. Like he was the answer to a prayer I didn't even know she'd made. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was hemming a dress for a client when the front door creaked open. "Amy," she called out. "There's someone I want you to meet." I looked up, and there he was. Tall, clean-shaven, wearing an expensive watch that didn't match the shoes on his feet. "Assalamu alaikum, auntie," he said, extending his hand with practiced ease. My name's Adil. His voice was warm, rehearsed, too smooth to be real. At first, I thought he was one of her college friends, someone helping her with a project. But when she sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, cheeks red, eyes glowing, he knew. I didn't say a word. Mothers don't need words to understand. So I smiled, even though something deep inside me tightened. That evening, as I poured chai for the three of us, I watched how he spoke. He praised everything. My cooking, the curtains, even the smell of my jasmine plant. People who compliment too easily make me nervous. Amy, he's doing really well in business, my daughter said proudly. He imports electronics. His company's expanding. I nodded, pretending to be impressed, though I noticed the way he avoided eye contact when I asked, "What's your father's name, Beta?" He smiled thinly. He passed away when I was young. His tone was smooth, but his eyes darted to my daughter before answering, like he was checking if she approved. That was the first red flag. Over the next few weeks, he visited often. He brought small gifts, flowers for me, chocolates for her, and stories that sounded just a little too perfect. He never stayed long, always leaving after a mysterious phone call. Once I heard him whispering outside saying, "No, not now, she's here." When I asked my daughter who he was talking to, she laughed. "Amy, stop being suspicious. You're acting like a detective." Maybe I was. But when you've lived through loss, you learn to read silence. And his silence said more than his words ever did. Still, I didn't stop her. I told myself she was young in love, and that love deserves trust. She began dressing differently, talking differently, even eating the dishes he liked instead of her own favorites. "Change is good, Amy," she said. "It means I'm growing up." Smiled. "Just don't grow away." She didn't answer. The day he proposed, I was in the kitchen cooking biryani. She burst in, her eyes shining. "Amy, he asked me to marry him." I froze, spoon in midair. "He did," I said quietly. "Yes." And I said yes. My heart sank, but I kept stirring the pot. "You barely know him." "I know enough," she said. "He makes me feel seen." I wanted to say, "So did your father, and look what grief left behind." But I bit my tongue. Her happiness looked so fragile, like glass in sunlight. I couldn't be the one to shatter it. A few days later, Adil came to ask for her hand formally. He brought sweets, smiled at my neighbors, spoke gently, called me Ami G. It was all too perfect. "Will you give us your blessing?" he asked, eyes steady, voice calm. I looked at my daughter, her face glowing with hope, and I said the words I'd regret forever. "Yes, you have my blessing." That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the veranda. The house was quiet, except for the soft creak of the ceiling fan. I stared at the empty teacups on the table, the ones we'd all used, and realized something unsettling. For the first time, my home didn't feel like mine. It felt like it was already his. Maybe love blinds both the lover and the mother watching from the shadows. Maybe I thought if I accepted him, I'd keep her close. But I was wrong. I didn't lose my daughter the day she married him. I lost her the day I said yes. It started with tea, laughter, and the sound of lies dressed as good intentions. I didn't know it then, but that day I was signing away more than property. I was signing away peace. 5 years had passed since the wedding. My daughter had grown into a woman, elegant, sharp, confident, the kind of woman I used to pray she'd become. Adil had done well for himself, or so it seemed. New cars, new clothes, endless talk of business expansions. They lived with me still, half out of convenience, half out of control. He liked to say, "Family should stay together, Ami G. That's how empires are built." I used to smile at that. Back then, the word empire sounded like pride, not warning. One afternoon, he called me into the living room. "Ami G, I wanted to discuss something important." He was sitting beside my daughter, laptop open, papers spread across the table. "It's about the property," he said smoothly. "There's been a new government tax rule. To protect our assets, we need to restructure ownership for a few months. Just on paper. I frowned. Restructure. He nodded, confident. It's just formality. I'll transfer everything back once the paperwork clears. My daughter reached for my hand. Amy, it's safer this way. You trust us, don't you? Course I did. Trust wasn't something I needed to think about. It was muscle memory. But something inside me whispered wait. I stared at the documents. Lines of text, legal language, things I barely understood. I ran my fingers over my own name, printed in neat black ink beside his. He handed me a pen, smiling. Just your signature, Amy G. Still your home. We're just protecting it. Protecting it. I liked the sound of that. I wanted to believe it. I had no reason not to. Sign. The pen scratched across the page with a soft hiss. It felt like a small act, one I'd done 100 times before. But this time my hand trembled a little. I thought it was just age. Now I know it was instinct. Afterward he thanked me warmly. You've always been the heart of this family. Then he glanced at my daughter, and something in their eyes shifted. It was subtle, but I saw it. That quiet exchange, that flicker of relief. Like a secret finally sealed. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe they were just tired. Maybe it really was for taxes. I didn't want to sound paranoid, not after everything they'd done to make life easier for me. So I cooked dinner as usual. Lentils, rice, fried okra. The meal he always said reminded him of home. But he didn't eat much that night. Neither did she. They talked in hushed tones after dinner, their voices trailing off when I walked by. For the first time my house didn't sound like family, it sounded like business. Days passed. Little things began to change. Mail started coming in his name instead of mine. Bank statements were redirected. One morning I caught a glimpse of my daughter tearing up an envelope quickly when she thought I wasn't looking. When I asked what it was, she smiled too fast. Nothing important, Amy. Just junk mail. I wanted to believe her. But trust, I learned, isn't always blind. Sometimes it's desperate. One evening I overheard a deal on the phone. Yes, she signed everything. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. His tone was low, urgent, unfamiliar. I stood frozen outside the door, my heart pounding in my ears. Before I could move, my daughter entered the room. He ended the call instantly. His expression smooth again, calm as water. Amy, he said, noticing me at the doorway. You scared me. What was that call about? Business, he said quickly. Nothing you'd understand. My daughter looked nervous. Amy, please stop worrying. You always think too much. Maybe I did. But that night I couldn't sleep. The next morning I found a copy of the signed papers on my dressing table, folded neatly inside a brown envelope. No note. No explanation. Just my name, crossed out in blue ink and replaced with theirs. My chest tightened. I went to confront them, but their room was empty. The closet doors were open, half their clothes gone. Only silence filled the space, that same silence I'd once known after my husband's death. Adil's cologne still lingered in the air, smelled like power and deceit. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint indentation where my daughter used to sleep as a child. The papers trembled in my hands. I whispered to myself, "It's just temporary. It has to be temporary." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The pen I had used still lay on the table, capped neatly, innocent-looking. Picked it up. Felt heavy. Too heavy. Like it already knew what it had done. Silence has a sound. It's the ring of a phone that no one picks up, the creak of a house that suddenly feels like it's waiting for something terrible. And that silence became my only companion. Days turned into weeks. At first I tried to convince myself they were just busy. Maybe a business trip. Maybe they needed space. But the lies I told myself grew louder than the truth. I called every morning, every night. Her number, his number, both went straight to voicemail. Sometimes I'd hear the first note of her old ringtone, the one she used to dance to in the kitchen as a teenager. It would cut off mid-ring, leaving me talking to air. Beta, please call me back. Just let me know you're okay. My voice cracked every time, shrinking into something small and pitiful. No answer. The house began to change. Mail arrived with names I didn't recognize. Then the letters started. Thick white envelopes stamped with firm, black print. Legal notice. I remember holding the first one like it was poison. Inside, words I couldn't understand poured down the page. Transfer of ownership, disputed occupancy, notice to vacate. I sat at the dining table, my reading glasses slipping down my nose, trying to make sense of it. But every line blurred into one truth. I wasn't the owner anymore. I went to the bank the next day, clutching my purse like a lifeline. The teller smiled politely, then typed my name into her computer. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said softly. "This account isn't under your authority anymore." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "It's my account." She hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering her voice. "It was transferred 3 weeks ago. To your daughter and her husband." For a moment I couldn't breathe. I wanted to argue, to shout, to demand my name back. But all I could do was whisper, "Are you sure?" The woman nodded, pity in her eyes. I hated that look. Pity is what people give when they know it's too late. Back home the walls felt narrower. Their laughter, or the memory of it, echoed faintly in the corners. The clock ticked too loud. Even the wind outside seemed to mock me. I cooked one plate of food, then another, hoping someone might come home hungry. But the food went cold. And the nights grew longer. Then came another envelope, this one from a lawyer. The letter said I was to vacate the premises within 30 days. Vacate. That word cut deeper than betrayal. Sounded like being erased, not just from a home but from my own life. I read it over and over, my eyes burning. My daughter's name was on the letterhead, right below her husband's. Her signature, neat, confident, final. I remember tracing it with my trembling fingers, whispering her name like a prayer that wouldn't come true. Neighbors started asking questions. "Is everything all right? Where's your daughter these days?" I'd smile weakly, pretending nothing was wrong. People don't really want your truth. They just want reassurance that their world is still intact. Mine wasn't. I tried calling again one last time. Her voicemail answered. "Hi, it's Zara. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I waited through the beep, tears spilling down my cheek. "Zara. Got the papers. There must be a mistake, Beta. Please just come home." The line went dead. I sat there, holding the phone to my ear long after the call ended, as if she might still hear me through the silence. But silence doesn't listen. Swallows. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the empty driveway, the one where her car used to be parked. The rain started, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the glass like a warning. Each drop sounded like an unanswered call. Each gust of wind carried the ghost of her laughter. And in that hollow sound I finally understood. This wasn't confusion. It was punishment. That silence. It was the sound of being erased. They say a mother's heart can survive anything. But no one tells you what it feels like to be told you no longer belong in the home you built. That morning, I opened my gate to find a man in a gray suit standing there, holding a brown envelope like it was a weapon. "Mrs. Rahman?" he asked. I nodded, clutching my shawl around me. He didn't meet my eyes. "By order of the court, you're required to vacate the premises within 7 days." His words didn't make sense at first. Vacate. The house was mine. I built it, brick by brick, after my husband died. Every wall held my tears, every room, my sacrifices. He slipped the paper into my hands and walked away before I could even ask why. The sound of the gate closing behind him echoed like a verdict. I stood there reading the notice. My daughter's name was typed in bold. Owner Zara Rahman. My knees weakened. The ground beneath me seemed to shift. I whispered to no one, "This has to be a mistake." But deep inside I already knew it wasn't. By evening I decided to go to her house. It wasn't far, just 10 minutes away. Still, it felt like crossing miles of disbelief. Her new home was bigger, colder. I stood at the gate, pressing the doorbell with trembling fingers. The door opened and there she was, my Zara. Her hair was tied back neatly, her clothes perfect. But the warmth in her eyes. It was gone. "Amy," she said flatly. "What are you doing here?" I held up the notice. My voice broke. "Zara, what is this? Why is your name on my house?" She sighed, looking past me. "It's not your house anymore, Amy. We already discussed this. Those papers you signed were part of the transfer." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I thought it was for tax reasons. Temporary. You said it would protect the business." Her husband appeared behind her, adjusting his watch like he couldn't be bothered. "It was legal. You signed it. Maybe you should have read it properly." I turned to him. You promised me it was safe. You looked me in the eye and said you'd take care of us." He smirked. "And I did. We took care of everything." I wanted to scream, to claw the smugness off his face. Instead, my voice came out as a whisper, trembling and small. "I trusted you both. You were all I had left." Zara crossed her arms. "We're doing what's best for our future. You'll be fine. We've arranged a small apartment for you." I stared at her. My daughter, my blood, and I didn't recognize her anymore. "You're sending me away, from the home your father built?" She flinched slightly but didn't answer. I stepped closer, my hands trembling. "Zara, look at me. Please. Tell me this isn't you." She looked down, then whispered, "Amy, don't make this harder." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Harder," said my voice cracking. "You took my house, my savings, and now my dignity. And you think it's hard for you?" Her husband stepped forward, voice sharp. "I think you should leave before this gets ugly." I turned to him slowly. "It's already ugly," I said. Then I looked at her one last time. "I raised you alone. I gave you everything. And now you throw me out like a stranger." She didn't reply. Instead, she whispered something to him, and he nodded toward the door. Moments later, 2 security guards appeared from the driveway. "Ma'am, we'll have to ask you to leave," one said gently. I stared at Zara in disbelief. "You called security on your own mother?" Her lips quivered, but she said nothing. Her silence was louder than any scream. As they escorted me out, my shawl slipped from my shoulders. One guard picked it up and tried to hand it to her. She shook her head. I turned once more at the gate. Her husband closed the door behind her, his arm around her shoulders. And just before the lock clicked, I saw it. A small, relieved smile on her face. The night air hit me like a slap. I stood outside their house, clutching the eviction notice against my chest. Street lights blurred through my tears. For a long time I couldn't move. The city went on as if nothing had happened, as if a mother's world hadn't just collapsed. I looked down at the paper again, the ink bleeding slightly from my wet fingers. My name was gone. Her name was everywhere. When she called security on me, I realized. She wasn't my little girl anymore. End of chapter 6. 700 words. I thought losing my home was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. The knock came early one morning. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the hollow space I now called an apartment. When I opened the door, a courier stood there, holding another envelope. Not brown this time. Official. "Mrs. Ramon?" he asked. I nodded, though my voice couldn't form a word. He placed the document in my hands and left without a glance. I stared at it for a long time before tearing it open. Inside were words that twisted my stomach into knots. "You are hereby summoned to appear in court on charges of fraud and misappropriation of funds." For a moment I couldn't breathe. Fraud. Me. I dropped into the chair beside the window, the letter trembling in my hands. My vision blurred as the words bled together. Fraud. Misappropriation. It felt like being buried alive under words I didn't understand. I spent that day wandering through my small apartment like a ghost. Every corner of it felt foreign. Bare walls, boxes half unpacked, the faint smell of someone else's past. By evening the whispers began. The neighbors, polite but curious, stared longer than usual. Their smiles felt sharp. Their words rehearsed. "She's the one who lost her house, right? I heard she forged her husband's company papers. Imagine, her own daughter suing her." I tried not to listen, but gossip travels faster than grief. I called my relatives for help. None picked up. One cousin finally answered, only to say, "Baji, I think it's best you sort this quietly. People are talking." Quietly. The word stung more than the accusation. I wasn't quiet when I raised my daughter alone. I wasn't quiet when I built a business from nothing. And I wouldn't be quiet now. That night, I pulled out a metal trunk, the only thing I'd brought from my old house. Inside were papers, receipts, letters from my late husband. The smell of dust and old ink filled the room. Each page was a memory. His handwriting, my signatures, our dreams. But nothing that proved I still owned what was mine. Still, I searched like a woman possessed. If there was even one document, one date, one clause that could save me, I would find it. By 2 a.m., papers covered the floor like fallen leaves. My hands were ink-stained, my eyes red. I found old property tax receipts, a few letters from the lawyer who'd helped me years ago. But the titles, the legal ownership papers, they were gone. That was when I remembered. The day I signed those temporary documents, my son-in-law had offered to safely store the originals in his office. A bitter laugh escaped me. He hadn't stored them. He'd stolen them. The next morning, I went to the courthouse, clutching the summons and my dignity. The clerk looked at me like I was another case number. When I asked for details, she slid a file toward me. The complainant's name was printed clearly at the top. Zara Rahman. My hand went numb. I whispered her name again and again, as if saying it would make it untrue. But ink doesn't lie. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, people were already whispering. I heard my name float between them like poison in the air. Fraud. Thief. Unfit mother. I didn't cry. I just kept walking, past the eyes, past the shame, until I reached the street. For years, I believed love could outweigh the law. But love doesn't leave a paper trail. The law didn't care about love. Cared about documents. And I had none. There's a moment when your reflection stops looking like you. Just watches you. That night, on the eve of the trial, I stared into the cracked mirror above my dresser and saw someone I didn't recognize. The woman in the reflection had gray in her hair that wasn't there a year ago. Her eyes, once alive, hopeful, looked like they'd been emptied of light. Her hands trembled, not from age, but from everything she was holding inside. I pressed my palms against the glass. The surface was cold. And for a strange second, I wished the woman in the mirror could step out and take my place tomorrow. She looked braver than me. The apartment was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. Every sound in that small space seemed to echo louder. The hum of the fridge, the whisper of wind through the window, the ache of my own breathing. I picked up the court papers again. My name was there, printed under defendant. And hers, my daughter's, under plaintiff. It felt like seeing two strangers on opposite sides of a battlefield. I walked to the kitchen and poured water into a glass, but my hands shook too much to hold it steady. It slipped from my grasp and shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp, final, like something breaking inside me. I sank to my knees, gathering the pieces with trembling fingers. The shards cut my skin, thin lines of red tracing across my palm. I didn't even flinch. Blood mixed with water, pooling on the tiles like something symbolic, life and loss in the same reflection. When I finally looked up, the cracked mirror across the room caught my eye again. The fracture running through it split my face in two. Half strong, half broken. I remembered the night my husband died. His last words as he lay in the hospital bed, holding my hand with the little strength he had left. "Take care of her, Nazreen," he'd whispered. "She'll protect you when I'm gone." At the time I thought he meant love. But maybe what he really passed down was a curse. 'Cause I did take care of her. I gave her everything. My youth, my money, my home, my trust. And somehow, I raised the one person who would destroy me. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the pillow he used to sleep on. The faint smell of his cologne still lingered. Faint, fading, almost gone. Like him. Like me. I closed my eyes and spoke into the dark. Arif. Kept my promise. Took care of her. But she didn't protect me. My voice cracked on the last word. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere distant. The rain began again. Soft, hesitant drops tapping against the windowpane. I looked at the photographs on the wall. One of them was of Zara, maybe 8 years old, wearing her father's cap and smiling at me with missing teeth. Her eyes were full of mischief and warmth. I traced her face with my finger and whispered, "Where did that little girl go?" The silence that followed was unbearable. I turned the photo face down. When I walked past the mirror again, I saw it differently this time. Not as something broken, but as proof. Every crack, every flaw, every reflection of pain, it was all real. No amount of pretending could make it whole again. And maybe that's what tomorrow would be. A confrontation with everything I had tried not to see. I wiped the blood from my palm and looked at the wound. It was small but deep, just like the betrayal. They say wounds heal. But some don't. Some just stop bleeding and stay open inside you. I sat on the floor until the rain stopped, until the city outside fell quiet again. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, falling in narrow silver lines across the floor. I glanced once more at the mirror. The reflection met my gaze, hollow but defiant. And I whispered almost to her, almost to myself. I had protected her from the world. But who protects a mother from her child? The first sound I heard in that courtroom wasn't the gavel. It was my daughter's laugh, soft, breathy, like she was trying not to let it out. But she wanted me to hear it. It sliced through me deeper than any verdict ever could. I froze in the doorway, my hand gripping the side of the bench for balance. Everyone else looked like strangers, lawyers shuffling papers, the judge whispering to the clerk, but her face I had memorized since the day she was born. And yet, in that moment, I didn't recognize her at all. She sat beside her husband, leaning toward him, whispering something that made his shoulders shake. He shook his head, still smiling. Then he looked up straight at me. That look, it wasn't pity. It was amusement. My knees trembled. I wanted to turn around, to leave before the bailiff even called my name. But I didn't. I walked down the aisle like a prisoner walking to her own sentencing. Each step echoed in my ears. Hollow, final, heavy. "Defendant, please take your seat," the clerk said. Defendant. That word used to belong to other people. People who stole, cheated, or lied. I had been none of those. At least that's what I used to believe. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and old paper. The lights were too bright, cruel even. I could feel every eye on me, every whispered judgment crawling down my spine. When I finally sat down, I dared to glance at her again. My daughter, my only child. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her face painted with that expensive foundation I used to buy for her birthdays. Now she wore it like armor. Our eyes met for 1 second. One long, shattering second. She looked away first. "Ma'am, please state your name for the record," the judge said. I opened my mouth, but my voice cracked. Razia Malik. The sound of my own name made my throat burn. Once, it stood for respect, generosity. A mother who gave everything to raise her daughter alone after her husband died. Now it was the name of a woman accused of stealing her own home. I tried to steady my hands. The paper in front of me blurred. The prosecutor began listing the charges. Fraud, misrepresentation, false claim of ownership. Each word fell like a hammer. My daughter's husband, Adil, sat so calmly beside her, his arm resting behind her chair. He had always been charming, soft-spoken, respectful. The kind of man who held doors open and called me Ami G with honey in his voice. Now that same voice whispered poison in her ear. I kept thinking, how did we get here? Where did trust end and betrayal begin? I closed my eyes and saw it all. The house I built brick by brick after my husband's death, The years of working double shifts, the nights when my daughter slept beside me because she was scared of thunder. I remembered promising her, "One day, this house will be yours." And I had meant it. But not like this. Not through deceit. Not through laughter in a courtroom. My lawyer nudged me. "Stay calm. Don't react. Calm." How do you stay calm when your own blood turns against you? I could hear their whispers behind me. Relatives, neighbors, people who once came to my home for chai and advice. She must have done something. Poor girl, having a mother like that. Each word clawed at my skin. I wanted to stand up and scream, ask her. Ask my daughter what I did wrong. But I didn't. I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. The judge's gavel struck once. "Proceed," he said. And just like that, my fate began to unravel in public. The prosecutor spoke of property transfers, missing documents, bank records, things I had signed, things I barely remembered. But what I do remember, clearer than anything, is that laugh. The one that said, "I've already won, Mother." I looked at her again. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't even angry. She was calm, composed, cold. Her eyes held no trace of the girl who used to braid my hair on Sundays or beg me to read her bedtime stories twice. All I saw was distance, the kind that money builds, the kind that love can't cross. Adil leaned closer to her and whispered, "She looks weak. This won't take long." Heard it. Every word. And my daughter didn't correct him. She just smiled faintly. That smile broke me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was familiar. It was mine. The same smile I used when hiding pain, when pretending everything was fine. Only this time it was turned against me. As the hearing continued, my mind wandered, not to defense strategies or evidence, but to the past. The laughter in this room reminded me of a very different laughter. Hers years ago when she brought home that man and said, "Amy, he's the one." That was the beginning of everything. I didn't know it then, but every smile, every signature, every sacrifice was leading me to this very seat. This courtroom. This silence. This humiliation. When the session paused for recess, I stood slowly. My body felt like stone. She brushed past me without a glance, perfume trailing behind her, the same scent I had gifted her on her last birthday. I whispered, "Why?" She didn't answer. But Adil did. He leaned in close and murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "Because you made it too easy." I sat back down, trembling. I wasn't sure if I was crying or shaking from rage. Maybe both. When I finally lifted my eyes again, my daughter was watching me from across the room. And then, she smiled. A slow, deliberate, knowing smile. And in that instant I understood. This wasn't about the house, or the papers, or the law. It was personal. It was revenge. They say justice is blind. But that day it felt deaf too. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale air, like a place where truths went to suffocate. Every step I took toward the stand felt heavier than the one before. My hands trembled as I placed them on the Bible. "I swear to tell the truth," I whispered, though my voice cracked midway. For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. The truth was all I ever had, and yet it was the very thing that destroyed me. Zara sat on the other side, in her pressed blazer and cool expression. She didn't look at me. Not once. Her husband, Rafi, sat beside her. His lips curled into that smug little smile I used to mistake for confidence. He leaned toward her and whispered something. She smiled, cold, rehearsed, distant. It wasn't the smile of my daughter. It was the smile of a stranger who had already won. The murmurs around me were constant, like insects buzzing in my ear. Neighbors, relatives, old family friends. They'd all come, pretending it was about justice. But really, they were there to watch a mother and daughter tear each other apart. The judge's voice broke the silence. "Mrs. Nazreen Malik, please begin your statement." I stood. My knees wobbled. My throat was dry, but I forced the words out anyway. I didn't steal. I didn't forge. Everything I did for her. A few heads turned. Someone whispered my name like it was a curse. I spoke slowly, carefully, as if every word was a fragile piece of glass. I worked all my life for my family. I sold my jewelry when times were hard. I signed papers I didn't understand because I trusted them. I paused, looking toward Zara. Because I trusted her. For a brief second, her eyes flickered. I thought I saw guilt. But then she looked down, pretending to adjust her bracelet, and that small, stupid hope inside me died. Rafi's lawyer stood up, sharp as a blade. He cut through my words with his tone. So you're saying, Mrs. Malik, that you didn't know where the money went? That you didn't sign the transfer? I signed, I admitted. But I didn't know it was taking everything from me. He smirked. Convenient. The courtroom tittered, small, cruel laughs. I wanted to scream. To tell them that trust can be a kind of blindness too. That love can make you sign your own ruin with a steady hand. Instead, I said quietly, sometimes mothers sign things because they believe their children would never lie to them. The lawyer rolled his eyes. The judge adjusted his glasses. Even the stenographer looked bored. As I spoke, memories bled into my words. Her first day at school. Her fevered nights. The sound of her saying, Amy, when she wanted comfort. All of that turned into evidence against me now. Then it happened. Zara laughed. A short, bitter laugh. It echoed through the courtroom like a slap. For a moment everything froze. Even the judge looked up. She covered her mouth quickly, pretending it was nothing, but it was everything. That sound shattered something sacred inside me. My voice faltered. I looked at her. My child, my blood. And I saw nothing of the little girl who once held my hand in crowded streets. All I saw was a woman who had learned how to destroy me politely. Zara, I whispered. Her name felt foreign now, heavy in my mouth. Do you remember, I said softly, how your father used to say we were each other's strength? Her lips tightened. She didn't answer. The judge called for silence. I nodded and sat down, my legs barely holding me. The lawyer continued. His words turning my life into a list of accusations. Fraud. Deception. Negligence. Each one hit like a stone, and I sat there, bleeding quietly behind my calm. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was somewhere else, in memories, in promises, in that broken mirror from last night. 4 years, I had fought for my daughter's happiness. Now I was fighting for my own soul. When the session ended, I didn't hear the verdict yet. I just heard her laugh again. Faint, distant, cruel. And in that sound I understood something final. When my daughter laughed, I stopped defending myself. I started defending my soul. I didn't breathe when the judge walked in. I think deep down I didn't want to. Because breathing meant accepting that today, whatever happened, something in my life would end for good. The courtroom was colder than ever. The ceiling fan creaked softly, papers rustled, and the sound of Zara's quiet sobs reached me like echoes through water. Rafi sat rigid beside her, his confidence fraying at the edges. He'd come dressed in arrogance again. Black suit, gold watch. But even arrogance has a smell when it starts to rot. I clutched the hem of my shawl, whispering a prayer that didn't feel like a prayer anymore. More like a plea. Not to God, but to fate itself. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. I just wanted my daughter to look at me and see her mother again. The judge cleared his throat. His voice cut through the silence like the blade of a guillotine. After reviewing all evidence, testimonies and documents, the court finds Mr. Rafi Qureshi guilty of fraud, misrepresentation, and unlawful possession of property. A gasp broke through the gallery. Rafi's lawyer dropped his pen. Zara's hand shot to her mouth. For a second everything slowed. The property known as 14 Rosewood Lane, the judge continued, is to be returned immediately to the legal owner, Mrs. Nazreen Malik. The words hung in the air. I didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't even blink. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. But now that it was here it felt empty. Rafi turned to Zara, whispering something through clenched teeth. She shook her head violently. tears streaming down her face. Then, for the first time in months, her eyes met mine. They weren't cold anymore. They were broken. "Amy," she mouthed, her voice barely a sound. It tore through me worse than any insult. The officers moved toward Rafi, pulling his hands behind his back. He didn't resist, just glared at me with a look that promised a hatred I'd already survived once before. "You did this," he hissed. I didn't answer. Maybe I did. Maybe justice did. But either way, it didn't feel like winning. Zara ran toward me, but the guard stopped her. "Please," she begged. "Let me talk to her, just once." The judge ignored it, already signing the papers. The room emptied slowly, reporters, relatives, strangers, all moving like ghosts around the ruins of what used to be my family. When it was finally quiet, I sat down. The wooden bench was cold beneath my hands. I looked at the judgment papers, the seal, the signature. It said Nazreen Malik, owner. But all I could think was, owner of what? A house. A victory. A grave made of memories. Zara stood at the door, her face pale, her eyes swollen. She looked like the little girl who once hid behind my sari when she was scared. But that little girl was gone. And this woman, this stranger, didn't know how to come back. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to say it's okay, my child. But my body refused to move. My forgiveness was still buried under too many broken yesterdays. The clerk handed me the final copy of the verdict. "Congratulations, ma'am," he said softly. I smiled faintly. The kind of smile that hides more sorrow than joy. As I walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight felt harsh, too bright for someone who just won a war she never wanted to fight. Justice had spoken. But justice doesn't mend hearts. Just files papers. And as I stepped into the empty street, clutching my victory in trembling hands, I finally understood. Justice gave me my home back. But it couldn't give me my daughter. The first thing I noticed when I opened the door was the silence. The same kind of silence that had once meant peace. Now it felt like memory holding its breath. Dust floated in thin lines of sunlight breaking through the curtains. My footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor I once polished every Sunday morning. Everything was where I'd left it, yet nothing felt mine anymore. I had won. But this victory tasted like ashes. I ran my hand along the hallway wall, my fingers tracing the faint pencil marks that measured Zara's height through the years. 4 years old, I whispered to no one. You cried when I said you couldn't reach the shelf. The faint line blurred beneath my touch, like it didn't want to exist anymore. In the living room, the photo frames still sat in perfect order. Family vacations, birthdays, moments frozen in time, before greed, before lies. Picked up one frame. Zara in her wedding dress. Her smile so bright, so full of the future. My hands trembled. You looked like me that day, I murmured. Maybe that's why it hurt so much when you turned away. The air was still heavy with her perfume, faint but stubborn, clinging to the curtains and cushions. For a moment, I almost expected her to walk in from the kitchen, holding a cup of tea, laughing like she used to. But the doorway stayed empty. Sometimes absence is louder than presence. I sat on the couch and looked at the window where we once watched monsoon rain. I remembered her small hands pressed against the glass, and my promise. Nothing will ever hurt you, Mary John. I kept that promise until she was old enough to hurt me back. In the corner stood a box marked legal documents. I should have felt proud, strong, justified. But all I felt was tired. Paper can give you a house, but it can't give you a home. I pulled out a single photo instead, the three of us. My late husband, Zara, and me. We were standing in the garden, his arm around us, smiling as if the world would never change. I took that photo to the mantel and placed it gently beside the lamp. Then I whispered, "Stay here. I can't carry you anymore." The weight I'd been dragging for months began to loosen. Slowly, painfully. Grief doesn't vanish. It only stops screaming. I walked toward the back door and stepped into the garden. The morning air was cool, sharp with dew. Birds fluttered in the trees, and somewhere, far beyond my fence, Life continued without asking my permission. The soil smelled of wet earth and second chances. I crouched down and touched the roots of the jasmine plant Zara and I had planted years ago. It had grown wild in my absence, untrimmed, untamed, beautiful in its defiance. Maybe, I whispered, some things are meant to grow without us. A single ray of dawn light spilled across the garden, warming my face. For the first time in months, I didn't feel cold. I turned back toward the house, my house, and smiled faintly. It no longer looked like a battlefield. It looked like a memory finally ready to rest. I walked to the gate and looked up at the pale sky. My voice trembled, but it was steady enough to speak one truth out loud. She taught me what betrayal costs. I paused, closing my eyes against the rising sun. I taught myself what forgiveness means.